I'm going to call the meeting to order at 7 o'clock then. It's good seeing you all. Hope you had a nice holiday, survived the virus so far, and prosperous new year, or at least bright prospects for this year. We have nobody from the public for comments, so I'm going to move down the agenda to number 3, approval of the meeting minutes from December 14th. Does anybody have any comments with respect to the minutes from last meeting, or can we move to approve?
I will move to approve the minutes.
Get a second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Okay, unanimously approved. Okay, Nancy, I guess that leaves you up.
Okay, a couple of my things will be in some of our later discussions, but things are moving along. We worked on, Nicole confirms no public. So we have worked to compile our statistics from last year. Of course, our statistics from last year bear, no resemblance to a normal year's statistics. So even though we're going to report them to the state library like we always do, I don't think anyone's ever going to use 2020 as a comparison year to see how we compared to other years. That said, I think we've done pretty admirably. It looks like we've circulated about 625,000 items this past year, even though we had greatly reduced hours and were closed entirely for a couple months there, and had very staff intensive delivery of services. So we hit a record, I believe, the year before. In 2019, we're at about 1.1 million. So it is a little more than half of normal, but considering the circumstances, I'm pleased with that. We also delivered from the advent of closing on March 13th because of COVID to the end of 2020, we delivered about 38,000 plus items through curbside delivery. So that's a lot. And actually, even though some days were slower or more busy than others, we had quite a few days where, and we continue to now, where we serve more than one patron a minute on curbside for all of the hours that we're open. So I think that's better than most fast food establishments. We're really doing a good job with curbside. We started a new service this week that, to our surprise and delight, has been immensely popular. It's called a Pick a Topic bag. And that's exactly what it sounds like. We were doing that anyway, but we gave it a name and publicized it, and people are really jumping on it. So basically, you can go through our website and click on a button, or there are numbers that you can call, also linked to the website. And basically, you pick a topic. Since we're not able to let browsers in right this minute, someone can call up and say, hey, I've really been into Italian cooking lately. What do you have? And then our library staff will find you 5 to 10 items on Italian cooking. This is immensely popular with parents of young kids who are tired of reading the same things over and over, and who call us up now and say, oh, please, give me 6 or 7 new books that have something to do with a shark or a train, for example. So we are taking suggestions on what people are looking for, browsing for them, putting things in kind of a surprise grab bag. And it's just started on Tuesday, and I don't know how many we've had, but our table that's set up to put the bags on so that we can take them out and deliver them through curbside is full to bursting. So that's been a lot of fun. Trying to still advance our online programs. We don't know how long it will be until we're able to do in-person programs again. In answer to the question of why we are not reopened yet, this is a very common question we get as the COVID numbers start to go in a positive direction, downward. The answer is that we are awaiting our carpet. Our carpet is on order. Things were delayed somewhat in our carpeting project because we discovered, as we pulled up a few carpet squares to investigate what was going around some larger cracks on our terrazzo floor, we found that we have a network of cracks that looks like we've had a small earthquake. So we have a lot of cracks in our floor that have to be filled. So it is not dissimilar from the cracking that was found next door in the Civic Center. Ours are apparently not as bad as in some of the other buildings, but they still have to be filled with an epoxy substance before we put the carpet on top. So we didn't fling the door open yet because we didn't want to open it up, move everything, close it back up, open it back up, because we find that our patrons are, or at least a while ago, were a little bit confused and frustrated with the open, close, open, close. So right now we were hoping to have a meeting with the construction folks, the carpet folks, and the furniture and book moving people tomorrow, but they will probably not be on site doing what they were going to be doing most of the day because of the snow. So that may be put off till next week. In the meantime, our carpet's on order. We can't wait to get the new carpet. The most common description of our current old carpet is dirty horse hoof prints. And that's, I thought it sort of looked like amoebas under a microscope, but the dirty horse hoof prints pretty much fit. So we will be really happy to have new carpet and new flooring, new washable flooring in our staff kitchen and our meeting room kitchen and our children's craft room. But that is why we are not yet open. We expect to be carpeted within the next couple weeks and be able to move back in. If you haven't been around before on any sort of carpeting project in a major building, I can tell you that in a library, it's a pretty complex thing to do. So we have to have professional movers that are used to moving library things that come in and load the library books onto double-sided wheeled carts, shrinky wrap them, and take them out. Usually what happens is they put them in a semi, load them up so that they're sitting outside while the areas are recarpeted, and then they bring them back in and put them back on the shelf, hopefully in perfect order. But it does take a while to, as you can imagine, to take all the books off the shelves and move the shelves. So we're glad we're not doing the whole thing at once. I've done that before, and we're just doing the first floor. So you'll see nice new carpet in the entries, the staff areas, the children's and teens area, and the meeting room. So we are happy that that project is almost underway. Other than that, staff's doing really well. Knock on wood, we haven't had any recent COVID cases or even quarantine cases. So we're knocking on wood that it stays that way until such time as the vaccine is more readily available to our staff. There is some discussion going on in Colorado, in the state library and among libraries. Depending on where you are, library workers are either considered frontline workers or they're not, as far as the vaccine goes. So in some areas, they have fit into the vaccine classification of 1B, which is the same as teachers, grocery store workers, et cetera. And in a lot of areas, we're just kind of lumped in with all the rest of the municipal workers. So I've asked public health, I don't have a response yet about what'll happen with our folks that work at the library, but there is definitely a disparity. We are now considered to be an essential service, but our staff are not considered to be essential workers. So there seems like there's a little bit of a strange disparity there. So that is pretty much what I know until we get into a couple of our other specific topics in old business.
Okay, any questions for Nancy on that information? None? Friends of the Library report?
I don't have a report yet. They have not met for January. They'll meet Wednesday. So I'll have a report at the next meeting.
Okay. Council liaison report?
You probably wish I had no report, but I do. Actually, let me just tell you the topics, then you can tell me if you have any interest in them. Tomorrow night, we're going to approve $877,000 in grants to nonprofits based on recommendations from our Housing and Human Services Advisory Board. We've got our short-term rental ordinance changes, which we've talked about, I think, in the past. There's a growing interest and concern about air quality and what our options are, or or what our limits are in terms of regulating or accountability for oil and gas operators who might be contributing to diminished or toxic air, lower quality air. And then I think our focus is going to continue to gain, I don't know, more energy. Our post-pandemic future will gain more energy, and what it will take for the city of Longmont to recover quickly with resilience and potentially differentiate Longmont from other front range communities in terms of optimism and opportunities and stability in the post-pandemic future. And I do think, I know I see you're going to, Nancy's going to talk about the feasibility study. I do think the two feasibility studies become a central part of that discussion. And to that end, I've probed a little bit, or maybe prodded a little bit with the Longmont Economic Development Partnership to start to get their attention on what the possibilities are between what happens with the performing arts feasibility study and the library feasibility study, and what's the potential of bringing together some big ideas and a big opportunity that will come along only once for this community, and what that could mean kind of as a lead opportunity in the post-pandemic future. So there aren't a lot of details until we get feasibility studies, but I just think we need to start getting people primed and excited about what's coming, and see what could be integrated here in a way that gets us more than we might enjoy, and more support than we might be able to generate if we look at these two just totally independent. So I'll stop. That's, if you have questions about any of that stuff or want to follow up, I'm happy to do so.
I have one or two questions on the other feasibility study. What is the pace of that? When do you expect deliverables from that?
I wish I could tell you. There have been, it's interesting, we have two pretty significant feasibility studies going on, and for our locals, both in this case Nancy, in the other case it's not so much staff, it's community members. There's some disappointment in the consultants on both projects.
Mm-hmm.
So the timeline on that one has been affected not only by the virus, it certainly has by the pandemic, but also by concerns with the consultants and what they're producing. So I got a pretty detailed update from Bob Balsman, who's the lead in the performing arts community on that study. My guess is we'll get that one in advance of the library feasibility study, but I don't think there's a date certain. And I know there's a lot of back and forth on what it is they're getting ready to recommend, and what we can do with that, what the interested parties are going to be able to do with it. So I wish, Mark, I could tell you it's, the end of February, or to my knowledge, there is no hard deliverable date to my knowledge. So,
Well, I don't think we want to stick our nose in what they're doing, but do you see a point in their progress and our progress when we should be talking to one another?
Mm-hmm.
yeah, I do. That's I've been trying to signal that for a while. I think, let me add, there's one more little variable, one more big variable here, and that is there's an investor group. I think they're talking about their fund as the Evergreen Fund, that is trying to generate interest and investors in a fund to make investments, one or more, in the Opportunity Zone, which is all that area north of the St. Vrain, right, from the sugar mill all the way to Hoover. All that work we did on the steam project is all in the Opportunity Zone. So that's where I've started some of this conversation. Is if you're building an investment fund, and you're going to look for opportunities, these two feasibility studies are going to present a pretty interesting pretty interesting. Maybe the biggest opportunity you'll ever have. Now, how well it's going to match up with what their interests are, Mark, I don't know. But I know the initial response has been to say, well, we ought to learn more about this and see what the possibilities are. And when the time comes, absolutely, this group, Friends of the Library, our primary employers in town. I mean, there are a number of parties that need to be brought together to say, look, let's just explore what's possible. If you want to make a big, bold presentation to the community about how you could get whatever this group might decide it wants, whether that's a library district or a dedicated sales tax, and keep the library inside the context of the city structure, that's going to be based on what the feasibility study brings and what you all decide you want to recommend. And I'll support whatever you're going to recommend. But this is not unlike, in my mind, not unlike what we envisioned the possibility could have been with the pool and ice facility, and putting that together with a proposed library district at the time. Right, that didn't come together. In this case, you put the library together with the Performing Arts and Conference Center, and you have a pretty large percentage of the community whose interest you could get, I think, some enthusiasm, and you could get a twofer. You could get two big results with one proposed tax increase.
So how does this coalescing occur in your mind?
I think we're going to have to put together, at the time, there's going to have to be a group brought together of all those interests to kind of map out what the possibilities are.
Or will citizens, or will the city do that?
Well, I don't think the city will do that. I don't think the city will do it as a government entity. I think it'll take council members. It's going to take the leadership from this board. It'll take leadership from the performing arts community, and then making a connection with, I think probably through the Longmont Economic Development Partnership. I think they'll have a keen interest. I know some of their board members are already interested. But it'll be a group that has to be brought together with opportunities laid out, and the mayor can do that. The leadership of LADP with the mayor, with Friends of the Library, and with the leadership of this board.
Okay, so this seems to be in line with some of the thoughts that came out of that Envision Longmont discussion a couple years ago.
You're talking about the STEAM project or master plan?
Master plan for the growth of Longmont, principally the Main Street corridor, but I think it extended beyond that, and it involved cultural centers and hotels and expanded library services and what have you. How does that fit in, do you think?
Well, everything that we're talking about right now fits pretty well with Envision Longmont, as well as what we did with the STEAM project a couple years ago. There's nothing that's a disconnect or is kind of unaligned with that. And you're right, the Main Street corridor plan, which is now being translated into actual planning documents. Same thing is going to happen this year with the STEAM initiative. All that is real congruent with, what I'm envisioning as a possibility, and I know others are as well.
Yeah, I was just probing for fellow constituents. When the coalescing occurs, of course, you want to bring in as many people as you can, I think, to make it work. It's just casting a bat for who that might be.
Well, I think initially, Mark, I think it'll be leadership from this group, from the performing arts group, and business leadership in town, who are going to have to come together. Somebody's going to have to trigger that, and that's where the city or the mayor could play a role, or your elected officials could play a role. But it will be it's going to have to. There's a variety of ways it could happen. At the very least, it will have to be a confederation of some kind, right? Or a collaboration among the leadership of interested groups, and to see whether or not with some facilitation, a plan comes out of that that could be coherent and I guess I know what better word, popular enough or compelling enough with the community to take it seriously.
And do you think this might be a actionable item in the second quarter?
Probably, I don't know. The second quarter, yeah, maybe. But by the end of May or June, yeah.
Okay, great. Any other questions for the councilman? Thanks for all that, Councilman Waters. Okay, that gets us through our normal list of items, unless there are any additional comments on any of those. And with that, I'll move to old business, and the biggest item under old business, of course, is where it should be with you, Nancy. So
Okay.
why don't you help us out?
This fits right in with what Tim was just talking about. So I have spoken with multiple consultants, one at length since we last met. I have finished redoing our kind of feasibility study phase 2, RFQ, our request for quotes. So that is on its way off through purchasing and through Karen's office and other city folks that will look through that. So definitely made some changes on what we want to see as deliverables in this second phase, which is going to consist mostly of the things that we felt weren't delivered in the first phase. A lot of what we're really looking for, we have a whole, what we got from the first consultant really amounted to a big giant pile of data. And so, what we want going forward is the consultant to come in and extrapolate from this data what makes the most sense moving forward for the library. So we've asked them to do basically, look at the data, what would be a low, a median, and an optimal level of service standard for things like building size, staffing, collection size, all those parameters. So that shouldn't take too long for the consultants to do. I've talked to several who I've worked with before, have done that very well. But then to take the next step, what we really need is, what does that mean? So how do we get there? What are the different ways to get there? There's a district, there's a city, and there's a hybrid. So we really want them to go off into those territories and say, what type of funding mechanisms are available for those different entities? So, is there a dedicated tax as a municipal library? Is there a district with its financial ramifications and also a difference in governance? Is there a hybrid model? And I know that some exist, for example, where you have a municipal library with a governing board, which gives you more flexibility in policy formation and some of the decisions that you make moving forward. So we really want them to take all that giant pile of data that we collected, a lot of community input, and say, okay, here's what we've heard from the community surveying about how people want to see us move forward, but what does it cost and what are the mechanisms? And break that down into the graphs and charts of, this is what it looks like for your average taxpayer moving forward. The original consultant survey pretty much said, that you can't pay for what you're going to need in the future with the city's general fund budget, which I think, Tim, I've heard you say it like 37 times, and I agree with you because I probably said it more often than that. So looking at what funding mechanisms are out there, looking at what the budget is that we need to provide these updates to services, technology, space, etc. That information is pretty readily available. The consultants that I spoke with did not think that this process would be nearly as lengthy as the original consultant took to compile data. So I think, Tim, we're talking only about a couple of months for someone else to come in and put together what we need. So And I have found several consultants who are interested and available. So trying to line up our ducks so that when this is ready to, when this RFQ is ready to go out, we will have a definitive date by which it has to be returned. And that I hope to know pretty shortly. So we're making progress. Ready to move forward.
Great. Questions, Katie?
Do you think that there's any change given the pandemic? I mean, I know
Yeah, I do.
ideally we're coming out of it, but not for a little while at least.
There is, and I think that is a portion of information that I've added to the request for quotes and said, here's what we envisioned pre-COVID, and some things. So we have a little addendum of basically the changes in library service since the advent of COVID. For example, we have a lot of patrons asking us to, even when we are fully reopened, continue some of our more of our online services. So we've had some of our online programs and services that have proven immensely popular. So there's going to be, I think, a sustained demand for those. For example, bilingual story times. So many people have said, can we please have these online, even when COVID is hopefully done. So, and just kind of the way we do some things, the fact that we've been talking about the digital divide in libraries for more than 15 years, and that it's only now really with the advent of COVID that people are taking that seriously and really understanding that people who don't have internet access really don't have internet access. And even folks who have internet access, maybe they're doing work at home and they can't print, they can't do things. So, seeing things where they were used to dropping by the library. So I think the way we use our space, our concept of how we use our space has changed, and just seeing how many folks have really been just at their wits' ends during COVID, during this period of unemployment, et cetera, and recognizing that this is the first library I've worked in 15 years that doesn't do computer classes just about every day of the week. We will do that post-COVID. We're already looking at basically how to rearrange the furniture and drop power so we can make a different computer lab and teach classes. So I think that it has changed our focus moving forward.
So I have a question. So when the consultant, whoever that is ready to present findings, will they, well, let me back up.
Okay.
The first set of consultants we had a series of report outs
Mhm.
to try and gain acceptance or communicate the findings of the report. How do you see these new sets of consultants gaining that same communication channel to the community?
I have expectations of a totally different product. And I guess the product that I am looking for from the second consultant is quite similar to the product that we ended up with when I was in Bellingham, Washington. And, the consultants came out, they talked to the board, but they also did the presentation to council. And, they did they had a lot of visuals, they had a package of, so it was, I think, a lot more cohesive and a lot more visual. So you could see, graphically, here's where our library is, here's where it should be, here's where it is compared to peer libraries. Here is what someone who owns a house with this value would pay in taxes to get a low, median, or optimal level of service. It's very, it's not as much just a compilation of statistics and community input as it is output. This is what this translates to. So I would thoroughly expect them to do a professional presentation or presentations.
Well, that sounds great. I hope they're able to do all that, because I think that'll really help.
I think I know a couple of them who have told me that they have availability and who are completely capable of doing so.
Good.
So.
Okay, any other questions for Nancy on this one? Very good, Nancy. I look forward to getting the final.
Me too.
Yeah, I bet. Okay, I asked to have this discussion on the Moser and the Empson funds added. I mean, we talked a little bit about this last meeting, of course. I guess I have a couple questions before just some general discussion. I assume that $2,000 check was cut loose and you're good with your reference material,
No
right?
problem. Mhm.
Okay, good. I went back in my notes, and in addition to what we said was in the Empson Fund in September, back in May 2018, there was almost $1,200,000 in the Moser Fund. So between those two funds, there's close to $4 million.
The fund, but it's not all accessible.
I understand
Yeah.
that, but some of it's the
There
corpus,
is.
some
Yeah,
of it's the corpus, and some of it you can pull
exactly.
it. Although some of the information that the councilman sent out suggested that council can rewrite the rules so they can dip into the body of the fund as well. It's there. I mean, they can do that, I think, is my interpretation. Anyway, so my point in all that was that's a lot of money,
Mhm.
$4 million. And this is the discussion part. Is there a role for our group in terms of making recommendations to council as to how to broaden or change the bequest guidelines so that it's more practical for use by the library when the library has a appropriate and approved project? For instance, I think the Empson Fund is tied to research material, and I think the Moser Fund is tied to learning disabilities. That may not be correct.
The Mosher Fund was originally tied to visual enhancements, etc. But there is a belief that, since it is so old and no one from the original Mosher family or Mosher Trust is alive, from what I have been told, that should be able to be used for other things. And we had talked about that for some of those, for an electronic sorter, which is an automated materials handler. We had talked about doing some of those improvements, like moving some things around, creating a computer lab, doing some of those type of things potentially with that money. As far as the Empson funds, that originally was for reference material, but I need to do some digging and see what the background is and if there's still someone around that has any kind of say in how the Empson fund is spent. Because I think that usually what my experience has been that when you have these funds that date way back, that you're no longer tied to the original purpose of those funds. It'd be really hard to spend that amount of money on visual materials for patrons. That's way before patrons could enlarge a font on a screen and see things, and you had to have readers and devices. But
well, my guess is you're more right than wrong. I mean, I would guess that whatever governance was there through the estate is passed because of the passage of time, and that there are those protocols that are out there that came from the original bequest. And it seems to me that if we're allowed, that maybe it should be an activity of the advisory board to at least put together some language as to how to suggest that those funds be looked at going forward and what kind of governance goes on. I don't think it would be in the library's best interest or the city's best interest just to throw it open and say whatever you need, take from time to time. I think there needs to be some oversight there, but there needs to be some rules surrounding that oversight.
yeah, I mean, we're actually
Throwing
working,
out to our group.
we're actually working on a concrete proposal of how to use at least a good chunk of the Mosher fund. We have appointments with 4 different vendors of automated materials handlers, which are electronic sorters, this month and the beginning of next month. And we're getting some estimates on some of the things that we would like to do as far as changes go with some of the areas in the building. So we wanted to come back and talk to the board about that and see. I think you're right, Mark. I think at that point, I'd rather come in with a concrete list and say, here's what we'd like to do with at least some of it. Here's how much it costs. At that point, propose deviating from the original, visual materials.
Okay, well, I would just say that in conjunction with that, the board needs to think about, in addition to that request, how it should manage future requests.
Mhm.
I mean, it can't be just a carte blanche. It can't be like the Friends where you come in and say, hey, I need an XYZ, and they write you a check. There should be some parameters around what's suitable and what's not suitable. Does that make sense?
Sort of.
Sort of. I don't want to screw with your prerogatives, but I just think that there's a stewardship role here for the board.
You do, but on the other hand, we never have, we have some large ticket items that this library should have had years ago that would not fit into a Friends request or our funding.
No doubt, no doubt. It would be my hope that the city would step up rather than dip into this money, but that may not be the case.
Well, my gut feeling is that they'd say, well, you have all this money, why don't you spend this on it instead? So
that's another reason why I'm proposing that we do what we do. So there is some governance to this so that it doesn't get raided.
well, if we spend it on some things that we need, it won't be there to raid. So
That's right.
yes.
That's right. But you can't spend it all. So,
Mark,
I see Tim's hand up.
I don't think there's any way the city could raid this. I guess the council could, somebody could put an item on the council agenda for council action to change the limits or the constraints or purposes of the Mosher Fund. In the first correspondence I had with Jim Golden about this, now almost 3 years ago, I think at that time there was like $573,000 that had accumulated. So it's north of that because it's now several years later. That was growth over the original, kind of principle that was available to be spent. And it was my understanding at the time that this board could decide to change, to redefine the purposes of those funds. And then in following up from the last meeting with Jim, then that email looked to me like, well, it would be a council action, but based on the recommendation of this board. But one way or another, right? The opportunity exists to broaden the purpose, right, or redefine the purpose of the funding. I don't know your comment a few minutes ago about spending down the principal. I'm not certain where that fits in all the that language, but certainly broadening the use of the earnings, right, from the time that the fund was created. And I think probably the smartest approach would be to assume that you would formulate a recommendation. I think the work that Nancy was talking about would be the basis for that recommendation to the council to spend X of the 500 now and 80,000 or 90,000 or 600 or whatever it is, at least of the earnings. If you wanted to recommend that you spend down the principal, I think that's a different conversation with Jim that we ought to get clearer on whether or not that's the prerogative of the council.
yeah, this is just me. I'm not speaking on behalf of others on our board, but I strongly agree that the funds should be repurposed because they're not satisfying much use right now. The reason I asked the other questions was because you sent out an email to Nancy and I that was from Jim Golden back in May of 2018 that was talking about the Moser Fund. And it has a bunch of information in it. And it says in section 3, it addresses that it can only be used for the benefit of the library. It can be used pursuant to the advice of the library board. City council has to designate its use. Let's see, city council has to designate its use. It indicates by resolution. An appropriation ordinance would also be required. Notice that it also does allow city council by ordinance to authorize use of the corpus as well for the library. So it has to go to the library, but they could spend it down, or you could spend it down if you chose. I would argue against that because then I think it depletes the asset, and then there's nothing in reserve for your rainy day. But that's with respect to the Moser Fund. I'd like to get something on paper that we recommend as a board as to how council should approach the use of these funds. And what safeguards should be in place so that they remain there for the use of the library going forward. That's my recommendation. And I see a lot of blank faces, so.
Well, that's a recommendation to the board, right? That's not a recommendation to the council.
No, that's my recommendation to the board, is that we put something together as a recommendation to council.
Yeah.
Like I said, we have multiple things that we have considered. So, I can put that together as a recommendation to the board. And I think going in with a recommendation of how we want to spend some of the spendable part of the fund at the same time as making sure that we can spend it is probably a good idea. So that it's not just this loose amount hanging out there. I like your idea of having some structure to that.
God forbid something happens and you're no longer director, Nancy. We don't want the new director coming in and saying, oh, gee, I got this pocket full of cash, I'm going to spend it all down. And then, then we don't have anything for the.
I wouldn't suggest spending that part of it. I would just, suggest spending a portion of the, whatever it's up to now, close to 600,000. And leave the rest to gain interest in the future.
Well, I'd like to combine them both.
Combine Empson and Moser?
Yeah, and then put a common purpose to both, and then have some sort of fiduciary responsibility in the very loosest of terms, where the board is responsible for at least looking at the monies once a year to see what the heck's there, because I know for years and years and years,
It's just that.
from my observation, the board didn't have a clue as to how much money was there and what it was doing.
Tim, do you think this is a good conversation to have with Jim Golden?
Yeah, I don't
do.
know. I mean, Jim, ultimately, I suspect Jim's going to say to you, well, if you have put together a proposal or recommendation and you want, it's going to have to come from the board, but put it on a council agenda and we'll go from there as new business and come back as a resolution, and then it would show up as one in a funding ordinance, which we do on a regular basis. So.
I just think it might be helpful for us to bring him in on the conversation, and he'll know the specifics of what we actually should be doing and how things should be termed, et cetera.
Well, I'm wondering if we can't put together a subcommittee of the board to just look at it and make a recommendation to the board overall. And maybe nothing comes of it, but I think there's a lot of money there, and I think it would be physically irresponsible for the board not to at least try and put some sort of policy in place to demonstrate that we are trying to manage it in a responsible fashion. So can I get a motion to put together a subcommittee to do just what I said? Can I get a motion to do something else?
I can try to reword it. I move that the board puts together a subcommittee to look at how the library, I don't know, how various funds are utilized by the library in the future. Is that what you're thinking? Or do you want it to be these specific funds?
Let me try. I move that the board puts together a subcommittee to consider a more flexible means of managing the monies in the Moser and Empson Fund for the future use of the library. How does that sound?
Second.
Second? All in favor? 4, 5, 4 out of 4? Okay. So can we get that in the notes, please, Catherine? Now we need the subcommittee. Do we have any volunteers? Do we have any financial types out there?
So I mean, we're actually looking at the funds. I thought this was more of,
The use of the monies, the use of the monies in the fund, the governance for how the monies get used.
Mark, can I ask a question?
Sure.
Is when you use the use of the term manage the funds suggests that you want to have fingerprints on how it gets invested or where it gets invested, as opposed to how it's utilized, right? I think what you're interested in is broadening the potential use of the funds and how the library benefits from the use of those funds, as opposed to how the fund is managed. Is that?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
And also, I think if you were going at it the other way, like what Tim said, if you were making suggestions as to how the funds is managed, I think you'd have to be a governing board in order to make that type of recommendation instead of an advisory board.
That's beyond where I wanted to take this
Yeah.
exercise. I just wanted to, there's as I said, there's a lot of money here. We would be irresponsible as a board if we didn't try to put some broad parameters on the procedures by which that money gets used. And that's what I'm proposing, is that just like we did the bylaws, we put together the bylaws and we said, this is how we were going to act as a board. And then we kicked it around and we got concurrence. And I would see that as the same exercise here, is we put together some broad statements as to how we think this should be addressed as a board. Not as necessarily as how Nancy would use the money, but just how we would manage the communication that goes to council to say that this is a good idea and that we think they should do it. Does that make sense? some
Yeah,
yes,
so I
some
don't think you need to be financial to do that. That's, I mean, financial is like you're like investing it, which,
no,
we're not-
no,
okay.
that's too far a leap, I think. And we don't really have that, nor can we envision future boards having that expertise.
I mean, I can put something together. I think it's probably like an annual state of the funds, right? Like something
Yeah,
along those
I
lines.
would say that, and like when so Nancy comes up with a great idea, it's going to take a couple $100,000 and we're going to dip into the funds. Does that carry with majority consent of the board? Do you need super majority? Do you need unanimous consent of the board? Something like that. Do you know, does it not go forward unless it goes to council first and council approves it as well? Yeah, just stuff like that. You know, how do you demonstrate to the public that yes, we were responsible when how we manage this money?
Got it. Can I ask, what happens to the funds if the library becomes a district and a singular entity?
Normally nothing. I mean, normally funds that are tied directly to a library, when a library separates from a municipality and becomes a district, go with it. But, you know, once again, there's a lot of stuff involved in looking at those. So
Yeah, that may be.
I'm just wondering for future, because if the library separates, then council's kind of like, do they need to approve it still? Does it need to go to council? Probably not. It's the library's money at that point, right?
Well, it probably transfers to the governing board of whatever that
mhm.
district becomes.
Right. Well, I'm just forward thinking. If we put together these guidelines, they should probably include some thought into that, right?
I think that's a great idea. And
Okay.
you know, I don't see this as a one and done kind of thing. I think it'll take a couple iterations till everybody feels comfortable, and Nancy feels comfortable, Tim feels comfortable that we put something together that's both responsible but also workable. And we don't want to handcuff the library in this process, but at the same time, I think we want to be responsible as a board.
I think it will take some mulling through, because there is that fine line too between the responsibilities of an advisory board versus a governing board when you handle this. So I think it will take a few meetings probably.
Well, no doubt. And I think by the way the estates set it up, they felt that there was a role for the advisory board, because there probably wasn't anything else to assign it to. So there it is. I mean, it's there's the lap that it's in. So take a shot at it, Katie, and we'll kick it around. Does anybody want to help Katie? Do you want help, Katie?
I mean, I can put the first rough draft together, and then I think we can go from there.
Okay, that sounds great. Thank you. Thanks for bearing with me on this. I'm going to move on unless there's other questions. Number C under old business, little free libraries.
I have a little bit of info.
Okay, great.
We were talking about looking for some spots to maybe create an indoor space so that we would not continue to have the issues that we had with the other ones in the park. And I made a delivery this week to the Suites, which is a Longmont Housing Authority affordable housing facility. And they had requested to have some books on hand for their residents, and we were withdrawing a whole bunch of stuff. So I took a load over there, and they may be one spot that's interested in future in having they have bookshelves, but it's a little free library. And we've had several other suggestions from staff that I'm looking into. Some are city facilities, some are not. One person on our staff had been approached with someone from Salud, the healthcare clinics, who take care of a lot of our folks that are English second language, and they had expressed some interest in having some children's books there that they could hand out to their patients/clients. So we have been looking into several different possibilities so far of kind of an indoor free library location. So I'm not saying that we couldn't put a cute little free library somewhere, but you know, after the third time when they were smashed to bits, it was a little bit disheartening.
So maybe if they didn't have a meeting, that's all great, but maybe if they didn't have a meeting, or the Friends didn't have a meeting, we were going to throw something in front of them as to whether they wanted to take ownership on this.
And they still could.
They could, but
I mean,
they haven't been broached on the subject at this point.
No, they haven't had a meeting yet. I was going to bring that up as part of my director's part of the Friends meeting on Wednesday. So
okay, great.
But we have been looking for some indoor locations for both adult and children's materials. We were able, since the Friends have not been able to sell the lion's share of their materials this year, and we had accumulated quite a few donations, even though we were ostensibly not taking them for a while. People still left them on the doorstep pretty much. So we passed out, for example, a ton of children's materials at the free lunch programs that were at both by St. Vrain School District and Children, Youth, and Families. So definitely looking at some maybe different ways, kind of outside the box, little free, instead of just the traditional, you know, cute box on a stand, little free libraries, because I think that there are still places that could use some free books.
Very good. My goal of this was to try and get the library out of the management of it.
I'll pitch it to the Friends.
And you didn't, let me try this again. You are not the original recipient of the books, they are, the Friends. So if they were up to it, then they would be a great source of books for little libraries if they chose to take on that role.
Well, it's all kind of the same pot. I mean, we were taking books before to put in the little free libraries that were given as donations or that were discarded library books before they ever hit the Friends. You know, people donate materials to the library, and also the Friends generally in their book sales don't tend to sell as many of the ex libris, of the ex library books, as they do some of the books that don't have the library markings and jackets on them. So the kind of things that we like to donate elsewhere potentially that end up going to a wholesale hauler after the Friends sales when they don't sell are the things like, you know, James Patterson has a new book out and we buy 15 copies, and then after a few months, you know, we might need to keep 3 of them, and we have multiple copies of these materials. So those are the kind of books that we tend to, we do talk to the Friends first. We don't just, you know, take the books, but say, hey, can we appropriate some of these donations for these other purposes? And this is pretty typical in libraries. I've given to Invite to Teach programs, to Books for Africa, to medical clinics, et cetera. Because we always have more books than we can then sell at the book sales in the Friends.
Okay, well,
Leftovers.
yeah, it wasn't my intent to get in the middle of any of that. I was just hoping that the Friends would take a greater role in supporting the little library. So, you know,
Give it a
have this
shot.
conversation and see what they say. Okay, folks, this is what everybody's been waiting for. election of officers for the coming term. Do we have anybody that wants to make a floor speech? Does anybody have a platform that they want to put forth? Say, anybody have any recommendations?
I would say don't nominate poor Cynthia in absentia because she's probably busy.
Cynthia did write me. She had indicated that probably in deference to Catherine's sufferings, that she would take secretary, but she's not. But she's not going to take it till she comes back. By the way, does anybody know if she had her baby?
I sent her a note and I haven't heard back from her yet. There was an away message that said she was going back to work at the beginning of May, but I don't know. I can try and find it. I can rustle up her phone number and text her.
Well, there seems to be relief for whoever gets the secretarial position.
That is very gracious of her.
I was also going to volunteer to do the secretary.
I made it that obvious. I'm so sorry.
I've done it. Nobody should do it twice in a row. But I can't do the friends. Like, I can't commit to 2 meetings. So
you go to the friends and take minutes there?
no, but if you're the friends liaison, you have to go to their meeting, which
Okay, right.
it's usually the same week. So it's just not it doesn't necessarily work for me necessarily. So that's why I was going to volunteer to be the secretary again. It is actually a little bit easier because you can be typing on Zoom.
It is a little easier, yeah. It's true.
So
well, should we just wait? And I'm fine doing it until we hear from Cynthia, and kind of you two could decide between you what is preferable, and I can manage for a while here for sure. I also probably can't commit to another meeting, unfortunately.
I can still be I'll still be the friends liaison.
Yay, Kathy.
I'm going to do that.
Nobody wants to be president? Chairperson?
you're doing a great
You're doing
job.
such a great
got it.
job.
Have that presidential air.
Well, you could be vice chairman.
I will share that I have decided to go to law school. So my life is going to change dramatically in the fall. So I can take on something maybe until August, but after that, I'm probably going to have to scale back. You know, I want to stay on this board, but I don't want to commit to anything additional time-wise.
You should do the vice then.
Yeah.
That's the least commitment. What does that say?
Think of vice presidents. What do they usually do? So
Kamala Harris takes exception to that.
So usually what happens is the vice chairman steps in when the chairman's indisposed.
Well, I could probably manage that.
So, so let me see if I can sort this out. So Kathy still wants to be with the Friends. Katie's willing to be secretary until Cynthia shows up. Catherine's willing to be vice chair. And I guess
That means you, Mark.
that leaves me. So do we have a motion for that slate of officers?
Are you okay being the chairperson in all seriousness?
Well, I know you guys back me up, so I'm okay with it.
I will move then to move forward with the elections of the officers as stated.
Second? Second, all in favor? Okay. So that's the officers. Next meeting date is February 22nd. And I have an announcement for the vice chairman. I'm going to be absent that day.
Yeah.
It'll be a good
That's a little
opportunity
bit.
for you to go in there and cut your teeth.
I'll start doing my homework now.
It's,
I hope
Well,
you're doing something fun
if
at
you've
least.
seen how I've done it, you know it's not all that tough. So,
I wouldn't say that.
any other comments or questions from the board? Council? Nope. Nope. Nancy?
No, I'm talked out. It's been a long day.
Any words of wisdom to leave us by? All right, then. With
I did
that,
want to mention that we did the craft bag, Nancy.
Oh, it's adorable.
This
For
was
those,
this
for those of
weekend's
you that
craft
don't
bag.
know, our children's department and some other library folks, while they're doing other things, put together hundreds of take-home craft bags every
We-
week. And
We,
as many as we put out, we started out with like 25, then we went to 50, then we went to 100, then we went to 200. And people
well,
specifically to pick them up because people, I think, are just really looking for hands-on activities that don't involve more screen time.
Absolutely.
we look forward to them.
Awesome. That one's particularly cute.
Yeah, that is.
I
a-
know, super cute.
It is cute.
It says that emperor penguin panache.
And there
Yeah.
have been some of them, not as frequently, but there are some that have been aimed at adults as well. So
Nice.
we've had finger knitting and a couple other things, kits put together for adults, but trying to find some things that aren't just screen time is a good thing.
Yeah, absolutely. Hey, I was wondering if we might want to send a card to Cynthia. Do you have an address
think-
for her?
I do.
Okay.
I don't have it right at hand right here, but I have it. I can send it around tomorrow.
Okay.
okay, great.
To do that.
Great.
We want baby details. We want pictures. So she was due the 9th. So hopefully the baby's a few weeks old.
Oh yeah, let's hope so.
Okay, I'd like to move that we adjourn at 8:08. And with the exception of me, we'll see you all next month.
Where you going, Mark?
Back to Florida.
Oh, nice.
Safe travels.
Safe travels.
Yeah,
Enjoy.
see how much virus I can get down there.
I hope you get your vaccine before you go.
So do I. Or get tested anyway.
Oh, yeah, it'd be good. Well, have a safe trip.
All right, take care now.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
All right, thanks everyone.